Hey everybody, today I'm going to show you how you can make a dashboard like this from scratch. So this utilizes slicers, it's got all sorts of different charts, and what I'm going to do is start by walking you through this process from start to finish. You can check out the description in this video, there'll be a link to a post on my website that'll walk you through this process as well. So I'm going to delete this and go into my data set. So this data comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's the OEWS data for May 2020, broken down by state. So on here, there's a list of data by state. I've got industries, positions, employment data, jobs per 1,000. You've got hourly and annual wages, both the medians as well as the different percentiles. Now the data looks okay, but there's one issue with this, and one thing you should always look for when you're creating any sort of dashboard or charts is looking at the data itself, because if it needs to be fixed or if there's issues with it, it's not going to make your charts look good. And the one issue you may have noticed with this data is there's number signs, there's asterisks on here instead of just blank values, and that can cause a problem when you've got these special characters when you're trying to make calculations. And so the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of them. So I'm going to select these columns, hit Control H for find and replace, and I'm going to replace the number sign with nothing. Replace all. I cannot do the same thing just for the asterisks because Excel is going to recognize this as a wildcard. So what I need to do is add this symbol right here, which is next to the number 1 on your keyboard and above the tab button on the left. So by doing this, it's going to look for just the asterisk. It's not going to treat it as a wildcard. So I'm going to replace all to get rid of that symbol. And so now that data looks to be good in terms of numbers. There's still one thing I want to change on here, and that's this occupational title, because there are a lot of different titles on here, and there are also categories here as well. So we've got the detailed breakdown, a major category breakdown, and total for everything. So if I look at total, it's just the total across everything. The detailed is going to be job specific, but the major is going to group it into categories. So we've got healthcare, we've got, management, business, that sort of stuff. But I still want to narrow this in a little bit more, because the problem is there's still a lot of categories here, over a dozen. And so if I want to put this into a pie chart, that's going to be a lot of different values on there, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is create another tab here that's just called lookup. And what I'm going to do is just copy over a table that I've already created for this, basically to serve as a lookup, just so I can group the data a bit easier, because I want to minimize the number of options that there are. So what I'm going to do is insert a column here and call this category. And I'm going to do a VLOOKUP. So I'm going to say if the category is equal to major, then I'm going to do a VLOOKUP. So let's try this again. So if this is equal to major, then I'm going to do a VLOOKUP of this value and extract the second column. Otherwise, it's going to be blank. Copy this down, and so now you can see some of those categories are being filled in. So now my data, I'm going to say, is good to go. The next thing I'm going to do is convert it into a table. So on the Insert tab, I'm going to click the button for Table, and yes, my table has headers. Hit OK. And now what you can do is, if you're dealing with a lot of tables, is you can name your table. By default, it's set it to table 1, but if I click here, I can change this to TBL data, let's say. Hit enter, and now I've created a table called TBL data, so it's easier to reference later on. Next up, I'm going to start creating some pivot tables. So I'm going to go to Insert, pivot table, and again, it's referencing that TBL data. I'm going to put it in a new worksheet, hit OK. And what I'm going to do first and foremost is I want to pull the median salary for a position, because I want the user to be able to select a position and determine what the median salary is for that position based on the different filters and slicers they've selected. So I'm going to get my field list, and what I'm looking for here is this annual median value. And what I also want to do is pull this O_group value, because this is what determines whether it's at the detailed, major, or total level. So I just want it at the detailed level just to avoid counting too much or calculating too much data. Now, the one thing I need to change though is by default it's taken the sum of this, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to right click, value field settings. I'm going to change this to an average. And then I can also change the number format as well, so it shows up as an accounting format with no decimal places. And I can also change the name, just so it just says median. Okay, so now I've got my pivot table that shows the median salary. So I'm going to change this to PT median as the name of that pivot table. Now what I'm going to do is create a simple chart that's just going to show me this value. So I'm going to insert just a regular column chart. And what I'm going to do is I just want the data label. So I'm going to hit add data label. I'm going to delete all these headers. Get rid of these field list buttons. This title. And I'm going to change the fill color so it's blank. Right, and then I'm going to maximize this so it's bigger, fills up most of the space, and so that way when I shrink this down, it's not going to be too disproportionate, and make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. So now I've got an easy, even though this technically really isn't a chart, but it gets me the number that I want. So I'll put this into my dashboard, and that'll be my starting figure to say, okay, this is the median salary. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show also the wages by the different percentiles. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to rename this tab to PT because I'm going to put all my pivot tables on here. I'm going to go back to this data tab here, and again, insert another pivot table. This time I'm going to select existing worksheet and select somewhere below that last pivot table. Hit OK. And for this one, I'm going to change it to PT percentile, because this is the one I want to pull in the different percentiles. So I'm going to select the annual values, so the 10 percentile, 25th, the median, the 75th, and the 90th. And again, I want to pull in that O group value because I want to filter it by the detail. And again, this shows the sums by default, so I'm going to have to go in and go to value field settings, change this to average, accounting, and I'm going to change this one so it says 10th percentile. And then again, repeat the steps for the next one, average, accounting, to call this 25th percentile. And so although this can be a bit of a tedious process at the start, this is really a one-time thing you would need to do just to make sure that your data's calculating properly. Because if you just go into here to change how this looks, like change to accounting format, that's not gonna stay when you refresh the data. So it's always good to go into this value field settings option just to make sure that you change it right in here, so that way it stays regardless of if you change or update the data. So 90th percentile. And so there, now I've got my different percentiles set up. What I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to use a 3D column chart just because it looks a little different. Under the design tab, you can play around with how you want it to look. I'm going to go with this this faded look, and again, I'm going to get rid of the buttons. And I always like to get rid of any of the legends and headers, just because I don't think that really adds a whole lot of value, especially when I can add data labels here. So I'm going to add this for each one of these. And then I can also format these labels just so they show the series name. And whoops, you always want to be careful to make sure you click on the right option here, because sometimes format data labels, that's right. And so yeah, change these so it shows all the different percentiles on here. And what I can do here is also change the color of any of these individual columns. So if I want to change this one so it's a bit lighter and easier to read, I can do so right here. So it's easy to make those changes. So I'm going to select this chart now and set no border to it, no fill option. I'm going to hit Control X, and then on the dashboard, Control V to put it on there. So I'll put it right here for now, not take up too much space, and move on to the next one. So for this next chart, what I'm going to do is take the median annual wage by the state, and by the states, and by the categories. So the idea being that you can look at an individual state to see, okay, what categories have the highest and lowest wages. Okay, so I'm going to go back in here, create another pivot table, select existing worksheet, and go back to my pivot table here. Hit OK. And in this example, I'm going to use the categories that I set up, because I want the wages shown by category. So in this case, I'm going to add the O group, but this time I want it for the major categories, right? The ones that I've categorized. I'm going to remove the grand total, and here I'm going to again pull that annual median value in here. Again, right click, value field settings, change it to average. Number format, we're going to use accounting again. Okay, and then I can change this to median. Okay, and then I'll change this pivot table to PT category median. Okay, so for this one, what I'm going to do is create another column chart. And I'm going to go back to design. No, sorry. Design. Change this to, again, a bit of that faded look. I'm going to get rid of values. Let's get rid of the buttons. And the name. And also the lines as well. And the one thing I also like to do with these column charts is shrink some of the white gap in between them. So if I right click format data series, there's an option to change the gap width to 50%. And so that shrinks that space down. And now if you see your labels going diagonal like this, and this is not your intent, then it's basically telling you that there's not enough space to fit the labels. So you may need to stretch them out or shrink them. I'm going to add data labels on here again, just so I have some numbers, because I don't have the scales in there. And just to make them fit in nicely in here. And again, let's set this to no fill and no line. Control X. And let's put this back on the dashboard. Okay. So now I've got a few charts into here. The next thing I'm going to move on to now, another chart, is this time I'm going to create a chart showing how many jobs there are per category, or how plentiful the jobs are. Okay, so again, insert, pivot table, existing worksheet, And again, since it's going to be category based again, I'm going to put it next to that last pivot table. And the O group set to major. I'm going to pull in the category. And there's this jobs 1000 value. So that tells you the number of jobs per 1,000 jobs. Okay, so for this one, value field settings, I'm going to change it to average again. But this time for the number format, I'm just going to leave it as a number with 2 decimal places. Hit OK. And now I've got average jobs per 1,000. And I guess I could change the names as well. Jobs per 1,000. Okay. And now, so what I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to create a pie chart. Just something a little bit different here. So let's do a 3D pie. And for the design, depending on what you click on, you'll get a different menu. So you always want to watch out for that. So I'm going to select this one, style 10. And again, let's get rid of the field buttons, get rid of the legends, header. And the one thing I don't like about these pie charts sometimes is they have way too many colors. And if you're trying to make something professional or for a presentation, you generally don't want to be too colorful. I always find it's a lot easier to keep things simple and a bit more modest and gradual. So I prefer a setup like this where you go from dark blue transitioning the light, so it's a bit cleaner, more subtle. And what I'm going to do is add some data labels onto here. So I've got the values, but I need to modify these data labels so that I also see what they relate to. Okay. So again, let's expand this out a little bit and then format the chart area so I've got no fill and no border, because that's going to be really helpful to making sure that blends in with your other charts. Okay, so the next chart I'm going to do is probably going to be one of the more complicated ones, is a gauge chart. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on it. I'm just going to show you an example of how you can create that. I've got a separate post that goes over gauge charts if you want to see that. But basically what I'm going to want to do is compare this median salary versus the national average to see, okay, how far on the gauge does it go? Does it go beyond or does it fall short? Okay, so I'm going to create another pivot table. This one's going to be really simple because I just want the national average across everything. So I can put that up here. Actually, it should be up next to this one here. Whoops. Okay, so that's the problem. You got to make sure that these ones don't overlap. So I'm going to leave a bit more space there. I thought I had the room, but there we go. So now what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to pull in that O group value, but this time the filter is going to be the total, because that's going to be the total across all the occupations, which is what I want. And then again for the median, I'm going to pull that value in there. And then again, let's change value field settings so they show an average. Counting. And let's change this to median. Let's change the pivot table to PT national average. And now I've got my national average in there. So now when you're creating a gauge chart, it's often a lot easier to try to set this up as a table separately. So I'm going to show you sort of template that I've set up for creating a gauge chart. And again, there's more detail on this on another post that I'll walk you through this. But basically, you want to be able to set up, how big the slices on your gauge chart are, as well as what the values are. So the key thing is you want this to add up to roughly 200. Just envision 100 being the top part of a circle, 100 being the bottom half. Together they add up to 200. So the low end should always be 0. The size of the slice indicating where the number is on the gauge is usually pretty small. I usually set this to 2. The percentage of completion, this is key because this tells you how far your gauge, your number is across the gauge. So in this case, I would take this median value divided by this median for the total. Now, the one thing you may be wondering why these medians are different. This one is set for the detailed, so it might encompass different items than what's in this total. But the point is, I want to use this to say, okay, how far is this certain position, its average, compared to the national average? Okay, so right now it tells me 1.32. So I want to multiply this by 100, so it goes to 100. But I also don't want it to go over 100. So I'm going to use the min function to say, okay, it's either going to take the lesser of 100 or this value. So that way it's not going to go over 100. And for the high end, what I'm going to do is say 200, again, the total of the top and the bottoms of the circles, minus this completion, plus the size of the slice. Okay? So that's how it should be set up. And so what I'm going to do is insert a custom chart, a combo chart, I should say. So I want to have two different types of charts in here. For the marker, I want it set to a pie chart. For the interval, set to this donut chart. And right now they overlap. This doesn't look anything like a gauge chart right now, but that's going to change. So a couple things I need to do. From the data series, the first slice should start at 270. Okay. If I change the series in here to interval, change this one as well to 270. And now you can see a bit of an outline as to how this is starting to look. Now, the key thing at this point now is changing the colors. So I'm going to start with changing the colors for the markers. So the key thing is, at this point, trying to select the right item that you want. So if I do Control Right, I'm going to start toggling through these different options. So right now I see that little slice selected, so I'm going to set that to black. Right, and the value before, I'm going to set it so it's clear. Control Right again. This value is clear. So that's really the hardest part is in some cases trying to find what these different pieces are. So this piece, this blue piece, I'm going to set it so it's a bit of a light green. This next piece, also a light green. This last piece to indicate we're really close to our target is going to be the darkest green. And this bottom piece here is also going to be clear, just so it doesn't show up. So that's how you can set up a gauge chart quickly. Like I said, once you've got this table set up, it's just a matter of highlighting the right things and making the colors correct and what they should be. So I'm going to go to, again, format the chart area, make sure there's no fill, no border, because this chart, as you can see, even though it looks small, it takes up a lot of space. So this is why it's important. You want to have this, you don't want to have a fill effect in place. So what I'm going to do is set this up, and later I'm going to put the average in here just for context to say, okay, this 55,000 is at the far end of the gauge. It's more than the average. So that's in a nutshell how you could create a gauge chart. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is create a map chart showing the median wages by state. So this is useful if you want to look at how the wages compare for one job across different parts of the country. So to do this, again, I'm going to have to start with creating a pivot table. Hit OK. And again, I'm going to take the median value, and this time I'm going to use the area title, which gives me the different states. Don't need the grand total. And what I'm going to do is, again, I can change that O group in here, and I realized I should have put this on my PT tab. So I'm going to Control X this out, put this down here, and delete this one. So back on my PT tab. So I've got that O group, and I'm going to set it to the detailed level and set the value field settings again. So they're the average, the number format set to accounting. Okay. So the one problem here though is I cannot create a map chart out of this because it's not going to let me with a pivot table. So there is an alternative. And what I'm going to do is create a separate table. Country, state, and let's say median. So it's going to be simple. I'm just going to reference, actually it should be United States. This one should reference the state. And this one should reference the median. Okay. So now if you're not able to reference your pivot table like this and it's using that get pivot data, what you can do to change that is if you go to the pivot table options and uncheck this generate get pivot data, because if you have this, it's going to give you an ugly reference like this, which is not going to be terribly friendly for a situation like this. Because for this, where I just want to reference the actual cell, I don't want to do anything complicated with get pivot data, then I want to turn that off. So what I'm going to do now is I want to copy some formulas down. And what I want to do is I don't want to put in any blank values in case all these states aren't filled in. So what I'm going to do is create an if formula. Say if this is equal to nothing, then I'm just going to take the value from above because it's really not going to matter as far as my chart goes. Otherwise, I'm going to take that value. And the same thing for the median. If this is blank, then I'm going to take the value above. Otherwise, I'm going to take that. And the value is always going to be United States. Use the format painter to copy. And then copy this all the way down. So that way, even if there's repeating values, it's fine because for the purpose of a chart, it's not going to affect anything. And it's just going to make sure that the data populates properly. So now that that's set up, I can go to Insert, Maps, and now I've got my map. Let's get rid of that. Again, let's get rid of the borders and the fill. Control X, and put that on my dashboard here. And so now it's starting to come along, and I've got all the main charts that I wanted for my pivot table. Okay. So the key thing starts to get crowded with all these different objects on here. But now the hard part is about over. The next part now is just really linking all this stuff up together and starting to create some slicers. So if you want to create some slicers, because all this data should be connected in one way or another, it doesn't matter where you create a slicer from. I'm just going to go click on really any pivot table, insert slicer, and I'm going to create one for the area title, which is the space, as well as the OCC title, the job position. Okay, and so generally what I always do is for the field that has longer names or has a longer list, I put that one going up and down, going vertically. So I'm going to hit Control X, and then on my dashboard, I'm going to paste it in here, just so there's a lot of room here, so it's easy to scroll through all this data. Okay, and now what I'm also going to do is, back in the PT tab, copy this area title and paste it into here. And what I can do is have this one going across and leave about maybe three fields or so. And then I can change the slicer so it has multiple columns in here. Okay. So again, I want to move some of this stuff down to make some room so it's not terribly crowded. And pull this stuff down just so, whoops. And again, you want to Always pay attention because it's easy to grab the wrong item here. So I'll move this out a little bit. Maybe shrink this one a tad. But again, this is really just down to your preference, what you want to emphasize. You know, I can pull this down here. Let's pull this one right around here. And one of the cool things you can do when you've got these transparent backgrounds is I can go and sneak in behind here and type in, let's say, national average, and let's say merge this, and then let's reference that average that we had there. So it's 4171 at national average. And so now you've got this frame of reference to say, okay, this is my median salary and this is my average, to show, you know, how far away you are. So here we can type something like, or maybe median salary, just so you've got some headings in here. So here we can say, you know, this is our median salary, this is our national average, this is where we compare, you know, and this is by state. And so we can add a heading onto this table as well. You know, we could call this wage data analysis. Right, have this spread across. Again, merge and center, bold. Whoops, maybe a bit too big. All right, so something like that. So we've got a bit of a header. We've got our different categories. And so one of the last things we want to do to make this all work nicely is connecting the slicers, obviously. So now in a previous video, what I did was connected the slicers to every single pivot table. But in this case, I don't want to do that, because there's some charts like this one that has it broken down by category. I don't want to select something like healthcare, and you know, it's only going to show up, one value is only going to show up, right? So for something like this OCC title, I can right click, report connections. And actually, the one thing I guess I noticed I haven't done is I haven't labeled all these pivot tables, because one of the reasons you want to label these pivot tables is so you know what they are later on. So I didn't do that for all of these. So this one is PT Jobs 1000. This one is PT Map, let's say. Okay, so I think that should be good now. So I go back to my dashboard now, go back to report connections, and now, so I don't want to link this to the category median, because this I want to keep the same. I just want it to change if you're looking at a different state. So I do want this to connect to the map, because I do want the map to update to show me the different salaries based on state. I don't want it to connect to the national average, but I do want the median, because I do want this to update. And of course the percentiles I want it to update. So those ones are the ones that I do want to connect to. For the state, this one, what I'm going to do is, this one will connect to pretty well everything. The only thing I don't want is that national average, because that one should be left alone. And so now that that's all linked up, now I can test this out by, you know, clicking Arizona, and you know, now everything updates. So based on everything, this is what the different medians are based on the categories. This is the breakdown of percentiles, right? And so you notice the median salary changes depending on the selections. So you know, if I want to look at accountants and auditors, you know, I can click on that, and you know, I can hover over and quickly see, you know, where the breakdown is of where the highest earners are in the country. So here looks to be pretty high. New York makes sense. You know, here in Washington, 77, the lighter squares Let's say Utah 64. So this is where sometimes it can be easy to sort of gauge the data to see, okay, does it look accurate and is it correct? So the median salary is 68, well over the national average. You know, if we look at another job, let's say, you know, cashiers, right? The median's only 24,000, so well below the national average. So that's where that gauge comes in really handy, right? So you see the percentiles. In the 90th percentile, it's only 31,000. In the 10th percentile, it's 20,000, right? So there's not a huge variance in there. We see the highest earning states would be Washington at 30,000, probably due with minimum wage, right? So you've got California also not far behind, whereas you've got a place like Mississippi, 19,600. So you can see how you can quickly filter through this data using these slicers and cut across the data as you need it. Now, the one last thing that you can do with slicers, it's not an issue on this chart, but if you want to keep them from moving, because if you got sometimes cells that can expand or contract depending on your selections, what you can do is if you select your slicers and right click size and properties, there's an option here that says don't move or size with cells. And so this prevents your slicers from moving, because sometimes you may have set up a nice pivot table, but then you realize as you're refreshing the data, it's moving all over the place. Or your slicers are moving all over the place, in some cases hiding and that sort of stuff. So by setting it to don't move or change size, then that ensures it stays intact. So that's in a nutshell how to create some dashboards. There's obviously a lot of more complex things you can do. You can do different types of charts and all sorts of things. I just wanted to give a bit of a cross section of different things that you can do. And so thanks for watching, and hope you found it useful.